This is not the apocalypse we were promised. I mean, we're the locusts. Because these crickets don't exactly suggest that the end is nigh. More personally, after 5 decades, of consuming American pop culture, I have to ask, for God's sake, where are the zombies? The living dead? Not that I want zombies, because I'm sick of zombies, like enough with zombies, you know what I mean? Like this country has an unhealthy obsession with zombies, an endless stream of movies and TV shows, all with the exact same plots, and making it worse is me. I make my own theater shows, and I've toured them to over 100 different fringe theater festivals, and at every one there is at least a show about zombies. I'll quickly do the math for you. That means that I have performed alongside over more than 100 individually produced, low-budget shows about zombies, theater shows about zombies, which means they're not scary because they're on the stage. There's no jump cutting happening, and so I think that I have a certain authority I can speak with when I say that no more need be said about zombies, except that I recognize the irony that through no fault of my own, through osmosis, the only apocalypse that apparently I am all prepared for is a zombie apocalypse. At least with the zombie apocalypse, I wouldn't keep forgetting that there's an apocalypse happening. Like I wouldn't keep leaving my home and going to the store and then realizing once again that I've forgotten my mask. And I'd survive a zombie apocalypse. I mean, if you were to look at me, like I perfectly fit into a stereotype. Like if you were a screenwriter and you had a ragtag group of survivors that you were putting together in your script, you'd definitely choose me. I fit a certain niche. I mean, like, look at me, okay? Look at me, right? Like, who wouldn't want a wizard in their group? And a headless, or just a head at that. Like, imagine if you survive a zombie apocalypse and you see just this floating head approaching you, right? Just like this. You'd feel like, well, at least that looks like someone who knows what he's doing. That's someone who's been around the block, who's had a few experiences, but in truth, I haven't, okay? I don't know how to do anything. I spent the entire first month in which I wore masks. I had those like surgical masks, one side's blue, one side's white, wearing them the wrong way out. I wore the wrong side facing out. And that was like the second month into this lockdown, because the first month I didn't even have a mask, so it's 2 months in. People must have been walking by me and being like, oh, look at that poor wizard who doesn't know how to wear a mask. It's too bad it's not a zombie apocalypse, because he really would have thrived in that environment. I remember the very first time I put on a mask. I remember the date. It was March 30th 2020, and I remember it because that was the day that my wife, Vanessa, and I decided that we would have to escape from our home, escape from New York. We were 3 weeks into this pandemic, and we've been doing what everybody had been told to do. We were just sitting at home on our couch, as we've been told to do, and just sort of like entertain yourselves. Like, look, there have been a lot of theories about where this coronavirus has come from, and I don't want to add to the conspiracies, okay? But it seems pretty obvious to me. I mean, right? If you just follow the money, okay? Where do you end up? You end up at Netflix, all right? And like every good conspiracy theory, Netflix has left clues for us to figure it out. I mean, try saying Netflix backwards. You can't, because it begins with an X, like every Chinese word I need say no more. Netflix, who just kind of rode in on their white stallions, just let us all know, like, it's okay. Sitting on your couch, you'll be fine. We have a lifetime of programming to take care of you. And you know what? It was okay, at the beginning, right? Because I felt it was the first time, maybe, at least in my memory, that the country felt united in one thing, something we were all equally angry about together, right? And that was, we draw the line at what is and is not acceptable, at people who hold a small bottle of milk and feed it into the mouths of small baby albino tigers just so they can take a selfie and post it to social media. And we all realized we felt an equal abhorrence towards this as we all huddled around our screens and watched Tiger King, which despite its title is not about royalty. It's about jesters. It's about fools. And as we were all afraid to go outside, we sat inside and felt morally superior as we watched these idiots on screen from this far away place called Florida, which when you look at a map, you're like, that's not even part of the United States. That's just little like skin tag hanging off like the bum of America. It's like this little like sort of like turd that like the anus of like Georgia can't quite pinch off into the Caribbean, you know? But of course we all know, even as we laugh at Florida, which the people in Florida do as well, we're well aware that Florida is actually the heartland of America. It is the place that chooses who is going to be our president every 4 years. It is the place we launch rockets up towards space. It is the place we go to recreate, to celebrate our victories. And it is the place that at least those of us in the Northeast all go eventually to die. I head down to Orlando to a great fringe festival every single year. And invariably, when I tell people in New York that I'm going to Florida, there'll be one person every single year who will be like, oh, so does that mean I can have your CD collection? And I'll be like, I'm not going to die. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said you were going to do the theater. And I'll be like, well, get Spotify already, would you? You know what I mean? Like, and then we sat around Tiger King and we watched these people, this documentary about these two people who each owned a zoo for tigers that they sold tickets to, right? And somehow they each felt that they were the true believers in the large cats and that they were the righteous ones. And it was the other one who was morally bankrupt. And we all watched them. And we were all like, how don't they see that they're just two sides of the same coin? How is it that they literally want to kill each other until all of a sudden we all have that terrible moment, you know? It happened to all of us at different moments in the series when we realize we've been tricked into watching a parable about America. And of course our first instinct is to just switch the whole thing off and to walk away. But of course, like every true narcissist, we can't look away. And we kept watching. Even worse, I think, than Netflix bringing this virus upon us just so they can goose the numbers of their subscribers is the fact that they did not have the foresight to make Tiger King 20 series long, each series being 40 episodes, because if they had, we'd still be watching Tiger King right now and nobody would be clamoring for a return to normal. No one would be like, we got to open up the economy and get back to work, because everyone would be like, no, we're still watching Tiger King. I'm watching Joe Exotic floss his teeth while he's looking in the mirror, which of course is really just us looking in the mirror into these sets, these computer screens, as we have been doing for this entire time. But we all had that moment when we realized that Tiger King is just 8 episodes long. If for Vanessa and myself, it was around episode 6 when we realized this isn't going to go on forever. This is going to end. And then what are we going to do? Because it seemed that with the ending of Tiger King, so was ending the city in which we lived. New York City, the museums had closed, the Botanic Garden, the bars, the restaurants had closed. Our ability to see our friends, to go outside, all of our worlds getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and us with no outdoor space to go to. Luckily, as I've said before, my godmother is the most generous woman in the world. And she said, go to my cottage on the other end of the most accurately named land mass in the world, Long Island. Which, unless there is an island called Island, this island takes the case for accuracy in its name. And Vanessa and I, we hemmed and we hawed, and we're like, I don't know, we're not really sure. And my godmother, Lisa, was like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you do it? And we're like, well, Lisa, you don't have internet out there, and we haven't finished watching Tiger King. She said, I will get you internet. Now go. And with that, we decided to make our escape. But of course, long gone are the days when Vanessa and I can just stuff a few t-shirts into a backpack and hightail it out of anywhere, because we now have a 1.5-year-old baby girl, which means we've got a lot of stuff. And because we're true New Yorkers, we don't have a car, which means that I'm gonna have to go and rent one way out at JFK Airport, which requires 2 subways and an air train. Vanessa's like, oh my God, it's not safe for you to go out there alone, which she didn't say at all, but I was imagining she was saying in her mind, and I was saying out loud to her, I will do this to save my family, which I also didn't say, but I've always wanted to say, so let's pretend that I said that. And it was on March 30th, 2020 that I stood in the middle of our apartment, and for the very first time I put on a mask, which is such a strange moment, you know, and you're like, really, is this me? Am I doing this now? An N95 mask, right? And then I went into the bathroom and I looked in the mirror, and I thought what surely my parents thought many times, especially after I went into theater. I looked and I thought I could have been a doctor. And afterwards, I reached down and I pulled up an N96 mask and applied it over that one better, right? And then Vanessa approached me with a roll of duct tape, and I said, Vanessa, I am currently wearing a combined N191 mask. Is that really necessary? And she said, I am Canadian, and duct tape is always necessary. Very carefully, she then sealed the mask with the tape to my face. This is before I was wearing a beard, before I thought I might be cast in a zombie apocalyptic movie of some kind. And she made the seal airtight, after which she then took a whole roll of saran wrap and wrapped it around my entire head, sealing the back with a couple of binder clips. Well, meanwhile, I took a bicycle helmet and put it atop my head. I'd affixed to the front of it 2 small floral colored patterned curtains that I tied back with big bows that I could easily grab for a quick release in case things get hairy out there. I then stepped into a pair of galoshes, and then I zipped up a full-body hazmat suit over my... It wasn't actually a hazmat suit, to be honest here, okay? We actually stole it from the front of a used car dealership. It has a little fan in the back, and when you turn it on, it makes your arms wave atop your head, which frankly looks ridiculous, but I was happy to have my own personal airflow. And Vanessa, look, I've long made fun of her for going out on the streets of New York and taking different things off of people's stoops that they want to get rid of. But I got to say, in this moment, I was pretty happy that a month ago, she'd brought home a very small diesel-powered crane that she now used to lift me up, move me across the room, and deposit me into the very center of a bouncy castle, middle of which she'd cut a circle into, and then resealed it to keep it inflated so that I'd be able to stand in the middle with my feet on the ground and then reach my hands out to either side and lift the bouncy castle up so I could make it through the streets of New York fully protected from bouncing into any other pedestrian. She then used the crane to lift me up and reach me out the 3rd-story window and gingerly place me onto the sidewalk far down below. It didn't go as planned. The crane tipped forward. I slipped out of the crane's grasp, but it was okay. I was in a bouncy castle and I bounced away from our apartment. True, one of the curtains came undone in front of my eyes because my hands were still flapping in front of my face. I couldn't retie it back up, but that's all right. Just with one eye, I can do this, right? If Kurt Russell can escape from New York with only one eye, so could I. I then made my way from our apartment to the subway station. Not an easy trip, because in one arm I was holding a generator keeping the bouncy castle inflated, and the other I was warding off kids who were bouncing back and forth across the bouncy castle. I don't know who they were. They were just there when we had the thing inflated, and of course I was stopping every now and then to sell tickets to other kids who wanted to get on the bouncy castle. Look, I'm out of work. I've got to feed my family. And I'm trying to squeeze by other pedestrians in their own bouncy castles, all of us being like, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, my bad. Our bouncy castles rubbing next to each other, making that terrible sound of rubber just squeaking against itself. All of us being like, oh my God, this pandemic is terrible, until finally I reached the entrance of the subway and realized I was entirely too full of myself to make it down. I don't know if I need to make this clear, but I am employing a certain degree of exaggeration so as to really make the point clear when I tell you that in fact I was wearing no protection at all, not even a mask, because I had yet to procure one. I just had my hands in my pocket for this entire walk, keeping my gaze pointed down at the sidewalk, hoping that I wouldn't catch the gaze of any infected person who might then look at me and realize that I am not one of them and pursue me thereafter. Luckily, down on the subway platform, there was nobody there. One person. There was one person there, and he was wearing a mask, and I was like, oh my God. This is my person. This is someone who, like me, is taking this seriously, even though, even as I thought that, I wasn't actually wearing a mask. And because perhaps I recognized him as a kindred spirit, I did look him in the eyes, and he looked at me back, and I said to him, crazy, huh? And apparently that was all the introduction he needed, because he then walked straight towards me, entered my airspace, pulled his mask down, and said, right. And I was like, man, are you crazy, man? You'll infect us both. But of course I didn't say that, because I value social cohesion more than I do my own health. And he began to tell me about how he's been spending the last 3 weeks of this lockdown, which have been the first 3 weeks of the lockdown, with his 21-year-old son, and how it's actually been quite nice. And they've been sort of getting to know each other, and the timing of this pandemic has been perfect, because his son just came back from Thailand. And I'm like, oh my God, Thailand is amazing. And he's like, I know, isn't it? The pictures are incredible. And me, I'm like, the true tragedy of this pandemic is we can't go and get pad Thai from its source. And he's like, do you want to see them? I'm like, what? He's like, the pictures inside? I'm like, absolutely not. But on the outside, I'm like, sure. And he takes out his smartphone, fires it up, and then hands not a phone towards me, but instead a brick of COVID-19, which I find my hand reaching out and accepting and looking onto its front, where I kid you not, the photo on there, this is no joke, is of his 21-year-old son, a small bottle of milk in one hand, feeding a baby albino tiger in the other, so that he can take a selfie and post it to social media. And I'm looking at it being like, isn't this the one thing we all agreed we will not abide? And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, we really are lost as a country. If this moment between him and me had been on social media, you can be sure that I would have set him straight. I would have let him know that these babies are taken from their mothers and that there's an illegal trade and it's not good for any of them, right? I would have screenshotted this conversation with him, would have posted it to my own Facebook wall so that my friends could comment on how righteous I am, about what a good person, and that if only everyone else in the world were more like me, but because I'm actually speaking to him in person, all I'm saying is, oh my God, these photos are amazing. He's like, I know. He's like, keep scrolling through them, and I don't want to, because with each scroll, I'm just flicking more coronavirus onto my left nipple as I'm going through them, and he's telling me we're having an absolutely lovely time. I'm thinking, like, what is wrong with you, man? Are you not afraid of coronavirus? Even as, again, I'm the one who's not wearing a mask. This is what it is, perhaps, to be an American, is to constantly be filled with a feeling of righteousness in the face of all evidence to the contrary. We rode the subway together. He had to go off to work. I went and rented the car at JFK. It's a moment, isn't it? When you're standing in front of a brand new rental. You open the door and it's so clean, cleaner than any car you've ever been in your life, and the smell of leather, and it's strange in this particular moment because I'm holding a bottle of liquid gel sanitizer that Vanessa has instructed I should slather all over the interior of whatever car I've rented, and so I tried just like, and just squirting it around, but the more I'm squirting it around the interior of this pristine car, the more I'm seeing all the places I'm not squirting it. And I don't know if you've ever rented a brand new car, opened the doors, smelled the leather, and then instantly just started ejaculating over the entire interior. It feels wrong when you do that, and that is exactly how I felt. So I stopped, put the sanitizer away, and just sort of blew on the car, just sort of like, and thought, that will do, that will do. Drove then from the airport to our apartment in Brooklyn, loaded the whole car up. My God, so much stuff. This baby is so small, and yet we have an entire IKEA showroom worth of stuff jammed into this car, right? Vanessa being like, are you okay? I'm like, I don't think so. I think I have coronavirus. She's like, how do you know? I'm like, because I'm tired. Because this was back when any symptom was an indication that you had the disease. And then we started driving, and within 5 seconds we both completely forgot that I in fact was infected as we made our way out east, out towards Montauk, 100 miles away, a trip that normally with traffic takes at least 3 hours, but because the roads were absolutely clear, we were there in just 5 minutes. We unloaded all our stuff into my godmother's cottage. I then got back in the car and drove it 2 towns west to East Hampton. Before I entered it, of course, I did get out of the car and change into a pair of khakis and a blue button-down shirt with a blazer over it and a pair of Ray-Bans on, then took a chainsaw out and just sort of shaved off the top of the rental car so that it now was a convertible, and I could feel that I did not stand out in East Hampton. But of course, there was no one on the streets as I made my way to this tiny little airport there. An airport so small that literally it just had a front door. Just one front door, and it was locked. And I pressed my face up to the darkened window and looked inside at advertisements of people smiling, of their arms around each other, a darkened view of what now seemed a distant life, and me thinking, oh man, now I've got coronavirus on my face. There's a little box right here. It says Hertz across the top, and I'd read that if no one's around, you should drop your rental car keys into this seemingly bottomless hole. And it's a real moment. It's a real moment there when you're holding the keys above this hole, knowing that once I release them, we are here. And if we get sick, I don't know what we're gonna do or how we're gonna get out of here. Because it's one thing to escape from New York. There are a lot of roads, there's a lot of public transportation, but to escape from Montauk, you either have to go back to New York, or you have to really commit to swimming across a very large body of water. I then walked from the airport to the train station in East Hampton. I followed the tracks that went near the airport. It took me about an hour, and I was walking down the very center of these tracks, and the tracks themselves went through the woods. Nothing evokes isolation and a sense of desolation, a sense that the world is ending, than walking by yourself down the middle of railroad tracks, particularly when those railroad tracks are often populated by the carcasses of deer that have been hit by the trains. Some of these deer's skeletons bleached white by the sun, some so fresh that their eyes are still open and gelatinous, and me thinking the end is really here and wondering, none of these deer could hear the train coming? Even as I'm continuing to walk down the middle of the tracks, knowing, despite the fact that I keep looking behind me, that if I do get hit by a train, the very last thing I will think to myself is, well, that was stupid. There was a liquor store at the train station. From the sidewalk, I could buy a bottle of gin. I don't normally buy hard liquor, but it seems like this was the right scenario in which to do so. And then I got on the train feeling entirely that the end was nigh, and that it was getting ever nigher as the train barreled down towards Montauk, which has given itself the moniker The End. You can find it on bumper stickers, on sweatshirts, on ball caps, on t-shirts. But never before has that nickname seemed more appropriate. And never before has a place seemed as appropriate as Montauk to wait for it. The end. From the train station in Montauk, I walked 25 minutes back to the cottage. I have coronavirus! And entered into the house where Vanessa was waiting. And we looked at each other. And it was like, now what? But of course we knew now what, right? We poured each other a gin and tonic and then sat down and watched the last 2 episodes of Tiger King. And now, it's 5.5 months later, and I have not left. And my consumption of Netflix has gotten less and less frequent. I think because at the beginning, it seemed like a distraction from this weird thing happening all around us that we don't understand and don't want to think about. But now, all these months in, we are coming to understand that this perhaps is just the way things are. This now is our life. And how much do you want to be distracted from your own life? This is it. This is what we've got. I'm out of work. My entire industry, which is live performance, has just disappeared. Anthony Fauci, right? Who is the closest we've got to a pinup here in 2020. He recently said theater shouldn't expect to exist in the way that we knew it until at least a year after a virus is created. Right? And it's pleasant out here. Don't get me wrong, But I've been sitting out here, and I've felt my aspirations, my sense of self, my plans for 2020 all slowly wither and die. And then just as slowly rise up from the graveyard of my gray matter. Now, undead aspirations, undead plans, an undead sense of self pursuing me in my mind. Always, and a little percolating anxiety. And I know eventually, right? They will find me and they will pile atop me and they will eat my brains, which will be a strange moment since these undead aspirations are manifestations of my brain. It will be sort of a self-lobotomy that will have me sitting where I have already been sitting, which is on the couch, rocking back and forth, wondering, what do I watch now? But it's beautiful here, right? And the crickets are loud. And it's easy to forget that anything is amiss, even as I know I'm one small calamity away from just losing it, you know? Luckily, I have a daughter who's 2 now. She had the world's most pathetic birthday party out here. Vanessa, she decorated the backyard with streamers and balloons, and this house already just has a profusion of lawn chairs. It always looks like we're expecting a lot of people to arrive, which we aren't because we don't know anybody here, and that's fine normally, but less so when you've decorated the backyard as if there's going to be a large party, and nobody came because we didn't invite anyone because we don't know anybody out here. But luckily our now 2-year-old girl, she doesn't know anything about friendship. I feel safe in saying she might be the most unpopular 2-year-old around because she has no opportunity to interact with other 2-year-olds. She doesn't even know that there is such a thing as being friends with other kids your own age. She's just blissed out and happy. So she was at her birthday party. She was excited by all the balloons. She took 5 of them down, got them in a big bunch, and then took them for a walk around the block. These poor balloons bouncing on the gravel behind her, slowly becoming deflated so that by the end of her walk, she's just pulling 5 different colors of broken rubber. Her having no idea that any of this looks terribly sad, you know, which of course is great for us to see how all of this is through her eyes. It keeps us in great spirits, even as I have to get up at 6 in the morning every other day to wake with her and to make her breakfast, as I did just again 2 weeks ago when I said to her, hey, you want some pancakes? Which is the kind of thing you just say when you're a dad, because dads say that kind of thing. And she was like, yeah, because she's a human being and she likes syrup. And so I got out all the ingredients for the pancakes and I set up a little footstool so that she could stand and be right at the counter to sort of help me make the pancakes. And I took out the mix and I took out the oil and I took out a brand new carton of 12 organic eggs. I don't know why we get organic eggs. Vanessa wants to get them, but it's fine. I'm organic. It must be a good match. And we opened them up. And again, I don't know about organic eggs, but each one of these eggs has been painstakingly, individually stamped with a logo. I don't know why. I don't know why they're afraid you might lose your eggs into a bunch of other eggs and then have to pick out the organic ones. Again, I'm not a marketing person when it comes to organic eggs, but if I were, I would suggest to them, guys, the one thing about organic eggs that I think is hurting sales is that they're very expensive, and maybe you could cut costs by cutting out this stamping process. But I know nothing about organic chickens. Perhaps they've bred them to sort of fart stamp them as they lay all these eggs. Who's to say? But Elia has the carton of eggs perched right at the edge of the counter. And she's opened up the lid and she's taking each egg and moving it from its holster into the sort of inverted holster made by the upside down lid of the carton. And when you become a parent, you realize, oh my God, we're all part cyborg, because every time you look at your child, on the back of your retina, there's a streaming series of numbers, as if you're some kind of cyborg that is constantly telling you both the geometry of every single direction she can fall and the probability that it will happen, that she will either cause bodily harm to herself or to the world around her. And to be a parent is to constantly wonder whether you should listen to those warnings and that you're reading on the back of your head, or whether you should just step back and let it go. Something I'm wrestling with here, right here, because it's reading out that there is a 100% probability that this carton of eggs are going to end up upside down on the floor of the kitchen. Eggs are going to be everywhere. As far as my computer is telling me, it is essentially already happened. But me, I'm aware that if I interrupt this very important project that she's in the middle of, it might cause her to get upset and to cry. And so I just say to her, I'm like, look, Elia, you got to be careful with those eggs that you have perched precariously at the edge of this counter, because if they drop, you're gonna be sad, and I don't want you to be sad. Now that I've said this, little girl, I'm absolved of all responsibility, right? We agree with that. And let's say she nodded, you know what I mean? And then I turned to get the mix of pancake, and it was not even a second. And when I turned back, it was like a jump cut. All 12 eggs are on the ground. All of them are broken completely. Right? And she's in the middle of them being like, the eggs fell, you know? And I might laugh now, but I can tell you at the time, it was like this anger, this red flush threatening to just dissolve me on the spot. It is the most heroic thing that I have done since this pandemic began, which was that I kept a lid on it, because she doesn't need me to get upset at her, even though I want somebody to take some of this frustration, some of this anxiety, some of this anger that I feel at my situation. She doesn't even know something's going wrong. She's looking at me to see if this is a bad thing. And I know if I let her know it's a bad thing, she'll start to cry, and that will add to the bad thing. And so I keep it all down, because I know that in the end, this is my fault. I might have said to her, I'm absolved of all responsibility, but of course I'm not. I'm the one with the computer in the back of the brain. I'm the one who understands how gravity works. And she's looking at me, and I'm just trying to tell her, like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. I'm just upset, you know, I'm just upset, okay? And I turn to get the roll of paper towels, and when I turn back, I just put my foot, like, square in the middle of the dozen broken eggs on the... I don't know if you've ever done that, where, like, there's one thing you're trying not to do, and then, like, a moment later, that's what you do. And I had no idea that the bottom of my foot was so tactile and sensual, really, because I could feel the goo of the broken yolks as Elia is asking me, can I put my foot in it too? And I'm like, no, you can't put your foot in. In fact, don't move. I've got clean up all the broken eggs around you, and I'm trying to scoop them up. And she's like, there's one. And I'm like, yeah, I know. And she's like, there's one. I'm like, yeah, I know. She does this 12 times because there's 12 eggs. And eventually I just have to walk outside, because I don't even know how to clean up 12 eggs. I just have to pick her up and walk outside, as I'm wondering, why is this upsetting me so much? Is it because I don't really have much else going on in my life? Is it because, like, other people might be like, oh, I failed at this, but that's okay. I'm working on a deal. You know, I've got a merger and an acquisition, both of them at the same time. I'm doing it all, man, you know, but me, I don't. Like, there's one thing I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make pancakes. And I've just failed at it. I could feel like whole sense of self just rattling. And I'm like, what is wrong with you, man? Keep it together, because there's people who are dealing with real problems during this pandemic. There's people who can't pay the rent. There are people who have lost loved ones. There's people in hospitals right now. We're at 200,000 people have died of this disease. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. There's one person who bears responsibility for that number being that high. And I know people are like, oh, Trump, all Trump, everything's Trump's fault. Oh, sure, blame it all on him. I do, actually, because he's sown chaos. He's sown discord. He has been at odds with science. He's even said as much. He has lied to us. He has lied to us, and he will lie to us again. And I know he doesn't care that I'm saying this, even if he knew I was saying this, because he simply doesn't care. And all the people around him, they don't care either. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she just passed away. And all these senators who were like, oh, we will not confirm someone because that goes against our principles. They have no principles. And if you don't vote them out, you've at least got to question your principles too. Because I think it's very important, the principles of the people who are our leaders. They're the people we look up to. They're the people that our kids should aspire to be. My Aunt Jenny, she passed away 2 weeks ago. Like, just before this pancake incident. Not of coronavirus. She had a stroke all of a sudden. She, 82. It's quick. It happened, you know? And maybe like all our relatives, we all imagine they're always going to be with us. You know, even if we're not talking to them frequently, you know, they've been there since we came into consciousness. They are our foundation, and we rely on them. Our narrative does, our sense of self, to always be there. My Aunt Jenny was a very independent woman. She was funny. She had an acerbic wit. She was game. She loved games. She was adventurous. She was youthful. And then it happens, doesn't it? We sort of feel that everything should be about this pandemic now and sort of forget that no, life goes on, and the ending of it continues apace. My mother was visiting us here in Montauk when this happened, and I was glad that she was here. It had been so many months since we'd seen her, so many months, you know, since she'd seen her granddaughter, and she just told me the news when she found out late on a Sunday night around 11 p.m. She just came in, the shock still on her face, and said, my sister died. And I was glad that I was there to hug her, you know, to let her know she's not suddenly alone, even though she's lost her older sister, the person that she said was her best friend. I'm glad she was with us, because there's no better medicine for loss than a 2-year-old grandchild who doesn't even know the concept of loss, for whom everything is a grand and wondrous and happy adventure. I suppose the silver lining of this coronavirus is that I was able to attend my Aunt Jenny's funeral, which was live streamed, as all things are. I was able to, from here in Montauk, Long Island, watch this funeral in Penzance, Cornwall, England. From the vantage point of the camera, at the way back of the room, way up at the ceiling, which is the vantage point we imagine that the recently deceased are also watching these proceedings, watching their own loved ones contend with their loss. This sudden profusion of communicating with each other, of watching shows and ceremonies, weddings, birthdays, and funerals via the internet has given us a sort of rehearsal for what might come after we pass away, should anything come at all. We are all ghosts in the machines these days, able to watch but not able to touch, able to listen but not able to smell, able to be there in a way that those who are on the other end can somehow still feel. One day, we will all go the way of my Aunt Jenny. It is the one thing that unifies all of humanity. The one real thing that word you could use to describe us is that one day we will all be dead. The difference is that we are still living. In that way, we are the living dead. Until eventually there'll just be one of us left, perhaps sitting here like I am now, speaking into a computer, hoping that there is somebody on the other end who's hearing this, but not entirely sure whether there is, no idea whether this is connecting with anyone. Someone who will eventually end the broadcast, who will close the computer lid down and will suddenly be truly by themselves, accompanied, like I am, perhaps by just the sound of crickets, who themselves seem to need no audience, or at least no human audience, to perform, to sing. Crickets, which are a kind of grasshopper. Grasshoppers, which are what turn into locusts. No one knows why. No one knows what triggers grasshoppers to transform into locusts. But all at once, they suddenly will. And in such a way, they will indicate that the end is nigh. For me, though, here in lovely Montauk, all I've got are the crickets. Because this is not the apocalypse I was promised. Thanks for listening. To whomever is out there, thanks for being part of this. This is as close as we're going to get to having some kind of theater for who knows how long. So really, thanks for making it that I'm not just talking to myself, even though right now it is as if I am. But I will close this down and I will look back at the Facebook feed and I will see who has been out there. If you've enjoyed this, do not feel inhibited in letting me know. If you want to know about these things more, then friend me on Facebook or go to my website, and there's a mailing list there. And even more than this, as I said before, I have no income. There'll be a little graphic that will come up. You can donate some money to either PayPal or Venmo. This is the way it is now. And both myself and a little happy 2-year-old girl and my wife will appreciate it. I'm going to fade this screen to black now, but just know that I'm still sitting here. This is all still happening. We're all still in this moment, listening together to these crickets. And until we do this again, maybe in another 6 weeks, I don't know. Stay safe and be well. And really, thanks once again for listening.